Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, July 2nd, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about the month of July and how it's probably going to be a pretty crazy run around college football, whether you're talking about conference realignment or recruitment or anything in between. There's going to be a ton of stuff to talk about this month, and I kind of want to break down some of the things that I'm really watching going into this month. Then we'll talk about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. It feels like everything is moving in the right direction up in Notre Dame. Obviously, they have done really good work in bringing in some really elite quarterbacks over the last couple of years. I think they're going to bring in even better guys over the next couple. So I want to break down that for you guys. Then we'll get into the playoff. We'll talk about how things could change very drastically if the SEC and the Big Ten do not necessarily get what they bargained for in this agreement and don't get a ton of teams into the playoff. I kind of want to break down what the monikers will be and how it could kind of change depending on how each conference goes about their business this year. Then we'll get into College Football 25. The overall rankings came out last Friday. I kind of want to break those down. I have some problems as I had problems with pretty much every other list that came out, but for the most part, they're relatively minor, except for just forgetting one team exists. But then we have a Top 10 Tuesday for you guys, and we're going to do the best games in Week 0 and Week 1 to get you guys a little bit primed for the season that is coming up very, very quickly. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump in, and let's talk about this month of July that is coming up, because it's going to be pretty wild. It started yesterday with all of the conference realignment stuff officially taking effect. Texas and OU are officially in the SEC. Texas and OU had their little party in their football stadium for the event. Obviously, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA to the Big Ten, Colorado, Arizona State, Arizona, and Utah to the Big 12, and then Stanford, SMU, and Cal over to the ACC. So all of those got shifted just a little bit. All the Power 4 conferences are a little bit different today than they were 2 days ago, which is obviously something we've been kind of prepping for over the last couple of years, but I would be surprised if that was the biggest conference realignment news we got this month. I think there's going to be a ton of movement over the next little bit about what all is going to happen. Obviously, Texas and OU are just set up. They're in the SEC and they're comfortable there. I'm not sure everyone's super happy that they're there, but they are there for the foreseeable future. But there's going to be tons of stuff that happens around the sport and around conference realignment over the next couple of weeks. And the biggest one is obviously Florida State and Clemson. What happens with them? How quickly do they find their way out of the ACC? If they want to do it by 2025, they likely need to let the ACC know before, I believe it's August 16th, somewhere in that range. So they're going to have to figure this out pretty quickly if they want to be in 2025. And if they don't, where are you going to end up? Because the SEC has said they don't necessarily have interest in either of them. I would say that will probably change as it kind of gets a little bit further down the road, but that's something that we'll see kind of unfold. But it'll be fascinating to watch that be kind of unfolding before our eyes, because the ACC, if they lose Clemson and Florida State, will be down to that 15 team number, which is kind of the bubble they sit on with the ESPN contract, and you can't lose those two without having a plan to grab some other teams, or it could mean the end of the ACC as we know it. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. And then, obviously, the Pac-12. This kind of predicates on the ACC and how they go about business, because I do think the Pac-12 is going to go out and add some Mountain West teams, get to that 8-team number that would be considered a full conference by the NCAA. Obviously, a huge moniker for the Pac-12 moving forward. But then you might just want to poach some ACC teams while you're at it. Obviously, some teams might just be finding their way out as this Florida State and Clemson thing kind of barrels down the tracks a little bit. So it'll be fascinating to watch this kind of unfold. I think the Pac-12 is in a position where right now you just got to get your head above water. You got to make sure you add those Mountain West teams, make sure you get to 8 teams total, and then you can kind of deal with possibly adding some ACC teams, possibly adding some different group of 5 teams, or forming with or merging with another group of 5 to make kind of a power conference in the group of 5. So there's a ton of different moves that can happen with the Pac-12, but it feels like a lot of the decisions are going to start happening here pretty soon. So I think we're going to have a crazy month here, or a crazy couple of months really, but I think especially in July, a lot of things are going to get kicked off, and I think the ACC and the Pac-12 will likely change pretty aggressively this month, or at least the prospect of them changing will become a lot more real this month. The other thing I want to talk about is recruiting. Obviously, we've talked about this a ton. June and July are the months. It used to be December through February was when the classes kind of took shape. That's no longer the case. It's usually right before that senior season of high school. They kind of want to get all this out of their way and move forward. And that's something that I expect to happen this time around as well. 6 of the top 10 players in the country are still uncommitted. I don't think that'll be the case in about 2 weeks. I think that'll probably be cut in half, if not more. So I think we'll hear from a lot of the top guys in the class, and also of the top 30, of the top 20, there's a lot of guys that are uncommitted. So a ton of classes are going to get some big boosts this upcoming month, and it'll be fascinating to see who gets the big boost. Kansas State, obviously, in this picture, got a huge commitment from a 5-star Lincoln Core, a really, really talented tight end. I believe the number 1 tight end in the country, if I'm not mistaken. So a huge commitment there. Obviously, some teams picking up pace with Bama and Georgia and Ohio State and Oregon kind of leading the way there. Penn State's done a great job in June. So it'll be fascinating to watch that kind of unfold. That's going to be something that we'll have to see who kind of comes out on top this month, because it's usually whoever comes out on top in July is the one that's going to win the cycle overall. So it'll be fascinating to kind of watch the commitments roll in over the next couple of weeks. But also, one of the big things happening is media days. As we all know, this is something that every offseason we kind of gear up for, get excited for, because we finally get to hear from a lot of the players, coaches, all the commissioners that we want to hear from at the SEC media days, at ACC media days, at Big 10, Big 12, wherever you're kind of interested in. There's plenty of things that come out of this that are really interesting, and it'll be really awesome to kind of watch this unfold over the next couple of weeks, especially with a lot of the realignment stuff going around. This is obviously something that's going to be a huge topic of conversation, and that guy right there, Jim Phillips, absolutely has his work cut out for him in the ACC. They're going to have to figure out a ton of things, and frankly, I think a lot of that stuff will likely come out during the media days. You have a lot of people interacting that usually don't interact, and you get some quotes that you wouldn't normally get. So I definitely think that's going to be something that picks up steam over those couple of weeks. The 13th through the 27th is every big conference meets between those 2 weeks. And there's going to be everything you can think of, whether it's realignment or house settlement talks is absolutely going to be a huge part of this, or you're going to have rule changes possibly to some of these different things. You'll get a better idea of how the helmet communication is going to work and that type of deal. So tons of stuff to break down from these media days, and that obviously will add to the intrigue going on during this month. And then finally, obviously, College Football 25 is coming out this month. It's one of the biggest days of the year for a lot of guys out there, including myself. It'll take me right back to when I was 12 or 13 years old and played that for just hours on end. So obviously very, very excited. Releases on the 19th, so just cannot wait for that day. We'll jump into overall rankings later. Obviously have a little bit of an issue with some of the different rankings that were given some teams, but overall we're a little bit closer to this game coming out, and that's always a great thing. I believe we're only a little bit more than 2 weeks, so not too far from now, we will have this game in hand and be ready to roll. So cannot wait for that. We'll likely do a top 10 of the teams that I'm looking towards doing a dynasty on next week, so be on the lookout for that. I'll definitely break that down. No Power 5 teams, obviously. That's not the way that I want to start my dynasty, but overall, I think this is obviously going to be a huge thing for gamers all over the place, but really just college football fans, and especially ones around my age who had this game growing up, and then it went away kind of very quickly, and you lost all the great moments that you had when you were a little bit younger, and obviously now that it's coming back, it could not be more excited. So it's going to be an awesome game. I think it's one of those that is going to really create so much energy around the college football world going into this season, and it's really just going to be an incredible thing to watch all of the content come out from it, and all of the people start to play it maybe for the first time, and everything in between. So just cannot wait for that. But overall, July is going to be absolutely insane. Let's just be totally honest. It's going to be one of those months that I think we remember for quite some time in college football. Not necessarily because of the recruiting or even because of College Football 25, although that's going to be an incredible day for a lot of people. that happens, recruiting obviously happens every year. Media day is the exact same. So that's not necessarily overly special in the month of July, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about this month. Whether it's conference realignment, the House settlement, you'll get a lot of details over the next month because of those media days and because of the conversations between some of the biggest people in these conferences. So it'll be fascinating to kind of watch that unfold. I think a lot of news about the student athlete pay and how that kind of is going to roll out will come out over the next month, and obviously we will cover it as it comes out, and it's going to be absolutely insane to watch all of this stuff roll out in pretty quick succession here, whether it's the video game or recruiting or everything in between. The coaches are going to have to juggle a lot, and frankly we're going to have to juggle a lot as we get into this season, because there's going to be a ton of things that kind of roll over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks that really affect the next 2 or 3 years in the sport, whether it's Florida State and Clemson finding their way to the SEC or the Big Ten or a mix between the two, whether it's ACC teams following them and leaving the conference and the Pac-12 possibly snapping some of those up. We could have an entire shift of power where the ACC falls out of the Power Four and the Pac-12 jumps right back in. So a ton of stuff could obviously happen over the next little bit. I think some of this stuff will be a little bit longer term, obviously, but there will be a lot of news. There's no two ways about that, and it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold, because this is going to be one of those months that I think we remember for quite some time, like that 2021 July where Texas and OU, it broke that they were going to the SEC. It feels like something like that's going to happen around the ACC or around the Pac-12, and we'll remember it for quite some time. So it's going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, July has become one of the biggest months in the sport. Even though there's not football being played, there's plenty happening around the sport, and this one feels like it might just be more intense than usual. But we'll definitely break it down as it comes, obviously give you every update that you need to know. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. It feels like they're heading even more in a right direction than they were under Brian Kelly, which was a pretty good team for a long time. So we'll break down what Marcus Freeman is doing right and how I think they might just take their national championship odds to the next level this year and the coming years, in the next couple of years, obviously. So we'll break that down after this, so stick with us.